For those of us who grew up with the controller in hand, there's nothing quite like dusting off an old favorite and asking the big question. Is it as good as I remember? Does the magic still hold up, or has it aged into a relic of a bygone era? Better yet, could it still hook a new generation today, or are we just blinded by the sweet glow of nostalgia? Today, we're deep diving beneath the ocean to look into a title that revolutionized the first-person shooter. I'm talking, of course, about BioShock. Released in 2007, this masterpiece dragged us into the depths of Rapture and asked if we kindly rethink everything we knew about choice in gaming. Does this underwater utopia still feel like a masterpiece, or is it finally starting to leak?
They told me, son, you're special. You were born to do great things. You know what? They were right.
Now, I've been playing video games for most of my life, and BioShock holds a pretty special place in my heart, and here's why. My first ever game console that I received was on my 6th Christmas. It was a Super Nintendo, an SNES for those who say it correctly. And with it, I received Super Mario World and Turtles in Time.
Holy cow, it's Turtles in Time!
Two of my favorite games of all time. And from then, I was hooked. And that started a love of video games that lasts until this day. However, there was a time where that love started to wane, and it was right around when I graduated high school. The PS2 was on its way out, the Xbox 360, PS3 era was kind of coming in, I had my first full-time job, I had a girlfriend, and games just kind of got pushed to the side. Now, I still kept up with big video game news, but I kind of felt like I might be leaving video games behind. That is, until I saw a friend playing BioShock. Now, at that time, it was exclusively for the Xbox 360, and it wasn't long after that I was buying my own and purchasing it strictly to play this game. It completely blew me away. So just when I thought that maybe my video game days were over, they pulled me right back in. It wasn't long after that I fully integrated myself into the 7th generation of consoles. That's the 360, the PS3, and the Wii. BioShock was, to me and many others, a breath of fresh air in a genre that had become oversaturated and sometimes even stale. Now, I recently revisited BioShock in its remastered edition. It was the first time that I have played it since the 360 years. So, by the end of this video, I'll be answering the question, is BioShock as good as I remember? Let's start off by taking a look at the studio that built it, Irrational Games. Founded in 1997 by Ken Levine, John Che, and Rob Fermier, this core team cut their teeth at the legendary developer Looking Glass Studios. That's the studio that put the immersive sim on the map with PC titles like System Shock and Thief. These games emphasized player choice by encouraging players to solve problems in different ways, instead of forcing you down one set linear path. Irrational Games initially struggled to find its footing and eventually wound up partnering with their old employers at Looking Glass Studios to co-develop System Shock 2. System Shock 2 launched to phenomenal reviews, but abysmal sales, selling what director Ken Levine jokingly called like 5 copies. After this, Irrational Games struggled for some time until 2K Games eventually acquired them. This would give the team a much larger budget to work with. For their next game, the team decided on an underwater setting, and with that locked in, they needed a reason for this place to exist. Levine had been reading Ayn Rand, and the objectivist philosophy perfectly fit the idea of a secluded, unregulated utopia at the bottom of the sea. But the visual aesthetic didn't truly click until Levine was visiting Rockefeller Center in New York, and he was inspired by the Art Deco style. Getting the visual identity right was only half the battle. They had to figure out a way to incentivize players to interact with the game's toughest enemies, the Big Daddy. The concept of a hulking protector and a vulnerable gatherer was born out of wanting to display primal, nature documentary behaviors. And as a side note, the little sisters originally started out as literal sea slugs. Luckily, it wasn't long before developers realized that players felt absolutely zero empathy for some slug crawling across the floor. So, they pivoted to the creepy little girls that we know of today. This forced a genuine moral choice for the player. Do you save them for a meager reward or harvest them for maximum power? Things were coming along well, but as development neared its end, the game was hit with a big, overlooked problem. A late focus test was so disastrous that Levine compared the feedback to a doctor delivering terrible news. Players were being dropped directly in the water without context, and they simply didn't understand who they were and why they should care. And I mean, think about it. It makes sense. You pop in BioShock for the first time, and your character is just floating in the middle of the ocean. Doesn't really do a great job of setting things up if you ask me. With virtually no budget left and less than a month before the game had to be certified, the team desperately needed an intro to bridge the gap. They coded a rudimentary intro sequence into the engine, threw up the BioShock logo, and Levine frantically wrote a radio play to loop over. That 11th hour fix is exactly what set the game's tone. When BioShock finally dropped in August 2007, it completely shifted the model for not only the first-person shooter genre, but games in general. It dominated the industry, pulling in flawless review scores and racking up practically every Game of the Year trophy in existence.
And the winner is...
BioShock.
BioShock had arrived, and it was about to make some big waves in the industry. It's 1960. You play as Jack, a passenger on a plane that crashes in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, conveniently next to a random lighthouse. After swimming through the burning wreckage and entering the structure, you hop into a bathysphere and take a ride down to a neon-soaked metropolis at the bottom of the ocean, Rapture. Rapture is the brainchild of Andrew Ryan, an extraordinarily wealthy man who longed for a complete, unregulated capitalist utopia. A place where scientists and artists could do whatever they wanted without the government or pesky morals getting in the way. No gods, no kings, only man. But the second you step out of the bathysphere, it's obvious the whole experiment went horribly wrong. The city is leaking, people have deteriorated into junkies, and society has totally collapsed. Why? A genetic material called Adam. Found in sea slugs, see, they still tied it back, Adam rewrites human DNA, allowing people to have supernatural abilities like shooting lightning or using telekinesis. The catch is, like many drugs, it's wildly addictive and aggressively rots your brain. A smuggler named Frank Fontaine realized this and monopolized the Adam trade, kicking off a civil war with Andrew Ryan. Trapped in the middle of this mess, you get a radio transmission from an Irish rebel named Atlas. He promises to help you survive if you help him save his family. So, you spend the game juicing up on plasmids, fighting off mutated splicers, and dealing with big daddies and little sisters, the city's tragic biological atom harvesting duo. The storytelling in this game is just incredibly well done, even when looking at it in today's lens. Building a sprawling city at the bottom of the Atlantic is a pretty fantastical idea, yet the game still grounds it so perfectly that you find yourself buying right into the illusion that Rapture could be a real place. And what really sells Rapture's spectacular fall from grace is the cast that you meet along the way. Ryan and Fontaine might be pulling the strings, but the city's day-to-day horrors are run by its so-called best and brightest, who have completely lost their minds, either to Adam or to their own unchecked ego. The game also gives you a choice for exactly how invested in the story you want to be. Sure, the main plot points are played out throughout the in-game cinematics, but scattered throughout the game are over 100 audio tapes providing even more context to the overarching story. And in my replay, I found myself super invested in the story, looking forward to getting the audio tapes and listening to what unfolded during the events of the downfall of Rapture. The aesthetic of BioShock is initially what drew me in when it launched. I feel like it's probably what drew in most people. And here we are nearly 20 years later, remastered version or not, it is still gorgeous. The visual integrity of this game has successfully stood the test of time. Believe it or not, BioShock was built on a version of the Unreal Engine that was already 5 years old when the game released. The team squeezed every drop out of it. The water effects alone had a dedicated specialist, and at launch, it was genuinely jaw-dropping. Game critics at the time called it some of the best water rendering they had ever seen in a game, and the PC version pushed DirectX 10 to deliver real-time ripples and reflections that made Rapture feel alive in a way most games simply couldn't match. But while technical achievements often have a shelf life, art direction does not. Once the team made the decision to use the Art Deco style for the game, it perfectly set the atmosphere and tone for Rapture. The bold geometry, symmetrical lines, and hard metallic surfaces of 1930s architecture were actually much easier for their heavily modified Unreal Engine to render than complex organic environments. There's something that Art Deco brings to Rapture that no other art style really could have. The whole movement was built around this idea of glamour and progress. This idea that the future is bright, humanity is capable of great things, and we can build something beautiful. And then you take that optimism, let it rot at the bottom of the ocean, and suddenly the decaying city starts to visually tell you a story. The grandeur of the place makes the fall of it hit much harder. If Rapture looked like a generic concrete bunker or a modern-day office building, you wouldn't feel the tragedy of what happened there. But because it looks like it was once genuinely magnificent, like people had real pride in building it, the decay means something. It sets the entire emotional foundation of the game, and it's something that very few games did back when BioShock released. There's no wonder this game won just about every single art direction award the industry had to offer. Then there's also a difference between a game that looked good and the game that was designed well. BioShock was both, but it's the design that really carries it. Every area of Rapture has its own distinctive visual personality. For example, the medical pavilion has this cold, clinical dread to it. Flickering lights, bloodstained tile, and the feeling that something horrible happened here recently. Fort Frolic is the opposite. All theatrical grandeur and unsettling glamour. But I guess also the feeling that something horrible happened here recently too. Each of these environments tells you something before a single word of dialogue is spoken. And that kind of environmental storytelling doesn't rely on texture resolution to land. The lighting especially deserves credit here. There's a warmth and intentionality to the way that Rapture is lit that a lot of modern games, with all their ray tracing and global illumination, still struggle to get right. Harsh incandescent bulbs casting hard shadows, neon signs reflecting across wet floors, fires flickering in spaces that have clearly been without power for years. It creates this layered, almost painted quality that makes every room feel considered. Like someone thought carefully about what this space should feel like, and not just what it should look like. Now, some of the character models do show their age. Faces in particular have that slightly waxy quality that's pretty common for games of this era. But honestly, I also kind of feel like it just lends itself to the art direction of the game. Nearly 2 decades later, stepping off that bathysphere and seeing Rapture for the first time still hits, and that's just good design doing what good design does. Lasting. The audio of BioShock is something that I feel like doesn't genuinely get talked about enough. And just like the visuals, the reason it still holds up today comes down to the same core idea: artistic integrity, outlasting technology. For starters, the score drew from modernistic classical music to create an unearthly atmosphere, with some pieces written specifically for key scenes, like the first reveal of Rapture. It went on to win Music of the Year, Best Interactive Score, Best Original Instrumental, and Audio of the Year at the Game Audio Network Guild Awards. But what makes the music so smart is what it was paired with. BioShock's licensed soundtrack pulled real recordings from the mid-20th century. Artists like Django Reinhardt, Bobby Darin, and Bing Crosby play on phonographs throughout Rapture. So you've got this genuinely eerie orchestral score underneath everything, and then you turn a corner to hear some scratchy jazz record playing in an abandoned restaurant. That contrast of glamour and dread sitting right next to each other is doing so much to make the setting come alive. The ambient sound design plays a huge role as well. The creaking metal, dripping water, and distant splashes create a constant reminder of the underwater environment you're trapped in. The echoing footsteps, the distant muttering of splicers you can hear but can't see, works to keep you on edge before anything has even happened. Ken Levine was so focused on getting the audio mix right that near the end of development, he had the team find the worst TV in the studio and listen to the entire mix through it, just to make sure it held up even in the worst conditions. That's a level of care that really shows. The voice acting also deserves its own mention. For a game where most of your story comes through audio logs and radio transmissions rather than cutscenes, the performances had to carry a lot of weight, and they certainly deliver. In fact, every character in this game is brought to life through voice. Andrew Ryan, Atlas, Tenenbaum, Sander Cohen. The voice actors all do a stellar job of bringing these characters to life well before you ever even see them in-game. When BioShock launched in 2007, the single-player first-person shooter genre was starting to plateau. Sure, the genre was still insanely popular at the time, but it was in need of some new innovations. 2007 proved to be a great year for the first-person shooter, starting with BioShock's release, and followed up by games like Portal and Call of Duty Modern Warfare. Yes, my disdain for Call of Duty aside, I do have to admit, this game was a huge innovation for online multiplayer at the time of its release. But for most first-person shooters, you had a gun, you pointed it at enemies, and you moved on to the next area. That was the deal. BioShock flipped that formula on its head and took a page from the immersive sim. Players were given the ability to add elemental powers to your arsenal. Now you could shoot electricity out of your hands, freeze an enemy solid, or light an oil slick on fire and watch it spread across a room. You could turn a security turret against the very enemies that placed it there. The combination of weapons and weapon upgrades, the environment, and superhuman plasmid abilities all gave players tools to approach combat in ways that weren't available in other shooters of the time. The plasmid system was genuinely revolutionary for the genre. You had a weapon in one hand and a superpower in the other, and the game actively encouraged you to mix them together. Shocking a pool of water could electrocute multiple enemies at once. Freezing an enemy solid and then hitting them with a wrench would shatter them completely. The environment itself became a weapon, and while environmental hazards and traps had existed in first-person shooters in the past, it came nowhere near the level that BioShock had achieved. This kind of combat felt refreshing to players of the genre. At the time of its release, the game was described as the first smart shooter for its approach to combining powers with traditional firearms rather than just limiting combat to guns. The plasmids still feel great. Combining them with the environment and your weapon is still satisfying, and the creativity the game gives you in combat still surpasses what a lot of current shooters have to offer. The core idea hasn't aged a day. If anything, it feels more impressive now that we know how rare it is to get right. Many shooters have tried in the decades since BioShock's release and have still fallen flat. When I was playing, it put me in a rhythm. I heavily relied on the Electrobolt plasmid to shock enemies and then follow up with gunfire. It's the plasmid I probably used the most, and when I was going up against electro-resistant enemies, then I would switch to Winter Freeze or Incinerate to stun them before I unloaded. It's also worth noting that there is no option to aim down sights, which is pretty standard in today's first-person shooters. Most boomer shooters, as they're called, prioritize fast, arena-style movement and accurate hipfire. I thought it might be kind of a pain in the ass to go back to this type of shooter, but it felt surprisingly natural, and I almost prefer it to today's first-person shooters. And maybe that's just my preference because I'm old and that's what I grew up with. That run-and-gun rhythm works great for standard enemies, but the pace completely changes when it's time to go against Big Daddies. And the reason why you would want to go against the Big Daddy is because they protect the little sisters who hold Adam, who give you the upgrades that you need to upgrade your powers. Unlike standard enemies, Big Daddies don't aggro on sight. They are neutral walking tanks until you provoke them, which means you dictate exactly when the fight starts, another mechanic that was really unheard of for its time. You should actively prepare for these encounters. I was setting up tripwires, hacking nearby security cameras to bring in bot support, laying down proximity mines, and making sure I had the right armor-piercing or enhanced ammo loaded before I pulled the trigger. Also, boss fights are fun, and this provided an optional challenge. Are you going to be some wuss and just walk past them? No, I want the upgrade and I want the glory of defeating the Big Daddy, so I'm going to go up against them. Once a Big Daddy is finally down, you face that moral choice. Harvest the little sister for a big immediate payout of Adam, or save her for a smaller reward but better long-term care packaging. It forces you to weigh your own survival and power progression against doing the right thing. Between those major combat encounters, the game heavily leans into its survival elements through constant looting and scavenging. I found myself digging through trash cans, desk drawers, and pockets of dead splicers, looking for every spare dollar, bullet, or health kit that I could find. Resources fluctuate from being aplenty to scarce, and it can happen rather quickly, so I always tried to stay ahead of the game by fully stacking my arsenal to stay alive. All that cash you scavenge goes straight into the game's various vending machines and upgrades. Buying out essential supplies from these machines is a must, which is why the hacking system is so heavily utilized. Now, the hacking minigame does slow the game down a bit. It's a pipe connecting puzzle that completely stops the action every time you use it. And while it fits the world thematically, it can get old, especially later in the game when you're hacking practically everything. It didn't bother me too much, but at times it can feel tedious. It's the one mechanic that does feel most like the product of its time. And then there's the final boss battle. Ken Levine himself has said publicly that he wasn't happy with it, and replaying it today, it's hard to disagree. After one of the most sophisticated narrative experiences in gaming history, the game ends with a fairly straightforward boss fight that doesn't really match the tone of the rest of the game that came before it. Honestly, the Big Daddy fights are much more intense and entertaining than the final boss. But those circumstances aside, BioShock's core gameplay is incredibly fun and entertaining. Moving through Rapture, making choices about how to approach each encounter, discovering new plasmid abilities, deciding whether to spend your atom on new abilities or upgrades, all of that still holds up decades later, and going back to it feels just as refreshing as it did when I booted it up back in 2007.
Welcome to the Circus of Value!
So that brings us to the big question that we started with. Is BioShock as good as we remember? When this game released in 2007, it received a Metacritic score of 96. The game was the recipient of just about every Game of the Year award and multiple technical achievement awards in the gaming industry. When you look at the complete package, the timeless Art Deco visuals, the brilliant audio design, a combat system that rewards creativity, and the narrative with exceptional voice acting and possibly the biggest plot twist in gaming history, it's easy to see why this game left such a massive footprint on the industry. Sure, the hacking can get a little repetitive, and that final boss battle does leave a lot to be desired, but those are minor scratches on the glass of an otherwise flawless experience. Going back to Rapture didn't ruin my nostalgia, it completely validated it for me. It reminded me exactly why this game pulled me back into gaming all those years ago. It proves that when developers prioritize incredible art direction and meaningful player choice over chasing pure technical specs, the end result doesn't really age. It respects your intelligence, challenges your morals, and it lets you shoot lightning out of your hands. What more could you really ask for? So my answer is a resounding yes. BioShock completely holds up today. This game is a masterpiece, plain and simple, and I'm giving it a 98 out of 100 on my replay index, making this an absolute must replay. But I want to hear from you. Do you think that BioShock still holds the crown, or has the genre moved past it? Let me know in the comments below, and I will do my best to reply. Now, last time on Retrograde, I took a look at The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap. I don't really have a video planned next, so please let me know in the comments other titles you'd like to see me explore in this series. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. I wanted to add this thank you message. A big shout out to Cash Crow. He is a friend of the show, and he's been on a couple of my live streams, and he was the one who actually edited this video. This video series, I've been wanting to get off the ground for a while, and I just haven't really had the time to edit them. And this has been sitting on the shelf, and Cash and I had talked, and he asked if I needed help editing anything, so I commissioned him to do this, and I think it came out really great. And if you guys get the chance, please head on over. I will link his channel in the description of this video, so check out Cash Crow Gaming. And now, before I get out of here, a big shout out to all of our supporters at the producer level. You guys know who you are. Jake Weed, Tanner Trezza, Pezmage, John Forhan, Smash Jackson, Gregory Hines, The Badger Knight, and Tupolev. If you would like to support Mass Replay, you can do so by becoming a YouTube member or a patron on Patreon. At the VIP viewer level, you will get all of my videos early and ad-free, plus exclusive director's cuts of my Arcade Economy series with extra footage, and an added video specifically for members every month. That'll do it for this video. It was really great revisiting Rapture, and I look to do more of these videos, so please let me know what you guys would like for me to explore next in this series. And until then, if you liked the video, please give it a big thumbs up. Please subscribe if you haven't, and hopefully you guys will see me on my next video. Thank you guys for watching.